Y'all know I love a good exploration, a compare and contrast, and this is one that I've been meaning to do for a while. Literally, I said I was gonna do it like 6 months ago. Latch hook versus tufting versus punch needle. And lest you be caught by surprise as we get into this, I'm actually gonna throw 2 more side contenders into this CNC. Embroidery, that's a needle, and rug hooking. The goal here with all of these, the thing that I'm focusing on, is to create a pile, whether a cut pile or a loop pile. Like both punch needle and embroidery can create flat-ish artwork, but I'm specifically going to be focusing on the methods that create this raised texture of floofiness, yeah? Even more specifically, I'm gonna be creating little samples that hopefully look at least kinda like moss, so that I can attach them to the stump rock rug, because we love a compare and contrast that's actually useful. Now, if you've been around the channel for a bit, you'll know that I have latch hooked, I have tufted, and you bet your britches I have embroidered. But these two, these are the newbies in the ring for me. I have attempted punch needle once at a trade show where they had a bunch of frames like set up as a community do some punching as you pass by kind of project. Do some needling? I marched right up to that canvas with all of the hubris of an 8+ year embroiderer who kind of thinks that punch needle is just a simpler, speedier version of what I do, and instantly failed. And then I failed again, and again, and the lady who was stationed there kept trying to explain to me how to not fail, but I just kept failing until I sort of like half succeeded enough for me to go, yes, delightful, but I must move on to another booth. Rug hooking, I haven't even attempted yet. So this should be interesting, right? There might be some bias based on learning curve, but I'm gonna really try to not be affected by that. I'll give myself some extra time with the 2 new to me techniques so that I'm not comparing like my very first try with my 10,000th time doing embroidery. What are we comparing though? Oh, lots of scientific stuff, of course. Supplies needed. Subcategories: cost of those supplies, space they take up, and multi-purpose ability. Difficulty of the craft itself. Mobility required, focus needed, all that kind of stuff. Time. How long does it take? And finally, versatility. What kind of variety can you get from this method? Let's start with our main 3, make some moss, hopefully, and we'll do some final comparisons at the very end. Before we really dive into rug making methods though, let's dive into some delicious goodies from one of my favorite sponsors, Wild Grain. Every time there's a Wild Grain box coming, I'm like that Snow White meme, just giddily awaiting bready goodness. Wild Grain is the first ever bake from frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, artisanal pastries, and fresh pastas, partnering with small bakers and pasta makers around the country to bring you food that is both nutritious and delicious. Every item in a Wild Grain box bakes in 25 minutes or less. Not the butter. Don't bake the butter. And makes your home smell amazing. They're always surprising me with new and seasonal selections too. This was my first time trying their English muffins, cinnamon raisin, which are a treat that just really needs to be warm from the oven, you know? These did not disappoint. So good with that aforementioned butter lathered on there. I'm always so happy to have some Wild Grain staples in the freezer too, like their croissants or their sourdough loaf. They use a slow fermentation process in their products that's easier on your belly and so flavorful. And they even offer gluten-free, vegan, and protein boxes, so you can select items that best fit your lifestyle and dietary needs. If you'd like to check out Wild Grain for yourself, then click the link in the description below and use my code THESTITCHERY to get $30 off your first box. Plus, my favorite part, free croissants for life. Thank you to Wild Grain for continuing to sponsor and fuel all of my crafty shenanigans. And now, let's dive into the pile. Get it? Pile? 'Cause rugs and stuff? It's funny, I swear it's funny. The supplies needed are a latch hook, some yarn, scissors, and rug canvas. So these supplies are fairly inexpensive. A basic latch hook is just a few dollars, and while you can get multiple sizes, you don't really need multiple sizes. The rug canvas can vary a bit in texture and size, but as far as I know, you do need to be using this sort of open weave canvas style rather than the more varied materials that some of the other techniques will allow. When it comes to yarn, you can get it pre-cut all to the same length, specifically for latch hooking. I've actually been seeing a lot of this at creative reuse stores recently. But also, you can just cut it yourself, and you can really use any type of yarn that you want depending on what you want the final piece to look like, so the price is of course going to vary wildly. All in all though, it's not a lot of supplies and they don't take up much room. There's no frame required, there's no electricity required, and if you're working on a fairly small piece, like say a mug rug, it would be pretty easy to take it with you on the go. The latch hook itself can have other uses. I think I've seen it used in crochet, and I've personally used it in macrame. It's also used in wig making, I think. And of course, the yarn can just come from your stash if you have one. The only thing that's not really multi-purpose is the rug canvas. Pretty high scores on the supplies then, so let's move on to actually trying it. I'm gonna create like a basic 6x6 square with every one of these techniques, taking note of how long it takes me, how much yarn it uses up, how like tiring it is on the hand or how difficult it maybe is, and then of course what the final piece looks like. After the basic test, I can play around a little bit to see what the versatility is. I cut a square of canvas about 7 by 7 inches and then marked out a 6 by 6 inch square and taped the edges because they are sharp and not really pleasant to handle. Even though you can buy pre-cut yarn, I'm cutting it myself, so I'm going to time that process too and take it into account. I also weighed the ball of yarn I'm using so I can weigh it again when I'm done and find out how many grams of yarn this took. Basic stuff for people more used to yarn-based crafts, but I don't often have to weigh yarn. Granted, I'm not really sure how much I'm gonna need, so I guessed this much, which took me about 4 minutes to cut. Wee. And then I realized I don't remember how to latch hook. Oh my god, I've forgotten how to latch hook. Good times. Quick refresh internet search, and we're off to the races. Okay. It is safe to say that I am not fast at this. It's been many ages since I spent 3 weeks straight hooking a moss rug. I think latch hooking is always a little clunky when you first start though, and it's definitely a bit wearing on the hands. Like there's a whole collection of movements you're having to do here, so it's getting a lot of finger muscles involved. 1 row down, that took me 5 minutes. I'm gonna go sit in a chair and do this on my lap, because I think that'll be more comfortable. That took 1 hour and 18 minutes to hook. I like the way the back looks. That was a big sneeze. And I did have to cut a little bit more yarn, but I managed to like cut just the right amount. So I used 28 grams of yarn. We don't have anything to compare this to yet, so this is all just sort of base information. I haven't trimmed it or anything, so obviously it's quite fluffy, which is a fun look, but what I'm noticing is that even with this fluff, I can still see through this the way that I did it. I could have crammed a lot more in here. I was basically doing like every other little section on here, because I found with latch hooking that it can be really difficult to cram it really close together. So I actually think it's better to do latch hooking with like a really fluffy yarn. I was already using 2 pieces at a time of this very like basic yarn. I would call this an incredibly basic yarn weight. And while it looks really cool, yeah, you can just you can see through it pretty easily. It's definitely not super full. It's also a bit harder on the hands. I definitely got faster and I think it's easier to do in the lap, but it's just sort of a bit of an unwieldy craft. When I spent 3 weeks latch hooking a moss rug, there was really no point where it was like, ah yes, this is very smooth and flowing. It's like, nah, you're always kind of like wrestling with a bunch of stuff and trying to find a better position. I feel like I should trim this down though to see what it looks like shorter, which is another tool that I will not be including on any of these lists, a trimmer, because it's unnecessary. You can just do it with scissors, especially if you're going for like mossy sort of somethings. Yeah, I mean, that's not bad. And if you think about it, if you're doing a larger piece, any place in the middle that is pushed together by having stuff around it is gonna look fuller, and generally when you're getting to the edges of what will be your rug or whatever it is, I tend to do more. So like on this edge section here where I've done every other one, I would do like every single one if I knew that this was going to be an edge. So of course, the versatility benefit here is that since we're doing it ourselves by hand, especially since you can get different sizes of latch hook, although I don't think you really need them, you can use quite a variety of yarns, different textures, different weights, different, fluffinesses. I used a bunch of different yarn on my original moss rug, and there were ones that were so big I needed to split them in half. That had more to do with the size of the grid that I was working on, of the rug canvas itself, because you gotta get it through there. But yeah, I think we should be able to create a variety of textures just by using different yarns and different lengths of yarn. So I'm gonna try some samples, try to make something that actually looks mossy, and then we'll take a look right now. So of course, out of all the examples I'm gonna do here, I think we know the most that you can get mossy textures out of latch hooking. Exhibit A. I was gonna say that the only thing you can't do with the latch hook is get a loop pile. In other words, a loop on the top of the fabric or the backing rather than a cut piece, However, you kind of can. You can't get a complete loop pile, but on this really thin yarn, I folded the piece of yarn in half and then pulled that through. So you get 2 ends and 1 loop when you do that, which creates a fun texture because you can see the loops and the ends all mixed in together, and it just looks a little bit different, looks a little bit fun. So you can kind of get a loop pile, just not a complete loop pile. All in all, pretty dang versatile, slow-ish, but not ridiculous. I think it took me 1.5 Celebrity Jeopardy episodes to do this. A good start. Let's move on. The supplies needed are a tufting gun, yarn, scissors, tufting cloth, backing glue, and a tufting frame of some kind, potentially with a separate yarn holding element. So of course, obviously, tufting has a much higher entry cost and space requirement than really anything else we're gonna try here. While the price of a tufting gun can range, a super cheap one might not be worth it since we're talking about a mechanical item here with small bits to it, If you go too cheap, the odds of it breaking or just not working right in the first place are much higher, which can, in turn, make attempting the craft really frustrating. There's also not a lot of versatility until you get up to the really expensive tools. The more inexpensive guns can typically do either a cut or a loop pile, not both. And they're usually set at a certain length when you get them that only maybe can be adjusted a little bit. So you're either having to get multiple different tufting guns, or if you want one that does it all, you now have to look at like the pneumatic tufting guns, which have rather high price tags. The frames can also be pretty expensive and they tend to take up quite a bit of space. I have the frame from Claw Lab, which can be taken apart, but how often is that realistically gonna happen? So that's already a pretty big chunk to have to store somewhere, and that's only big enough to make like a doormat-sized rug. I built my larger frame myself, which was much cheaper than buying it pre-made, but it's massive, and it's now just sitting here in the living room waiting to be used again. I also had to build this yarn box to hold the spools of yarn, because otherwise your tension gets all messed up. And this was cheap to build, it's just scrap wood, so it was essentially free, but it's still another pretty chunky item that I had to acquire and now store. So there's not much point in going into the supply list any further, because we're not trying to come up with a specific number here, just a ranking. Obviously, this is going to be the most expensive thing I try. It's definitely not a crafting technique that I would recommend investing in if you just want to give it a little try or make a little something. I would recommend looking for a class, an open studio, a friend who already does tufting. But if you're really into making rugs, does the speed and the ease of use and the uniformity, etc., make up for the cost and the storage space needed? I definitely wanted to time the prep here, because that can be quite a lot with tufting. hanging new fabric, getting the tension right, drawing on your design, though mine is of course just a 6x6 inch square, setting up the tufting gun, and of course, winding your yarn. Now, I think anyone who's super into tufting would just be buying the tufting yarn that comes on cones ready to go, but I have this lovely, janky, and totally doable method for getting any yarn I want onto cones for easy use. Huzzah! Prep took me 13 minutes, and then I could get to tufting. And yeah, it doesn't take long, does it? 5 minutes and 5 seconds to get this square all filled in. It's looking rather nice too. The pile is all even, it would barely require any trimming. It's pretty dense all the way through. I've learned to pack my yarn pretty close together. We used 32 grams of yarn here, notably 4 grams more than I used on the latch hook piece, even though it's a considerably shorter pile. Of course, with tufting you do have some waste yarn, but I think that difference has more to do with the density than the waste. So while I would call tufting easy in that the gun is doing most of the work, there's definitely, you know, a learning curve there, especially if you're using different guns. The Claw Lab one is intended for like really beginner usage. So normal ones you're using 2 hands and you're having to guide it here and you have to be really careful going around curves and stuff. So like there's definitely something to learn. You're not necessarily going to pick it up and just immediately be good at it. But comparatively to things that require some sort of like finger dexterity, you're holding things a certain way, it's maybe a little more straightforward. On the other hand though, it does take some strength. Just from doing that 5-minute sample, my arm up here is sore because you're having to push into the fabric really hard to do it well. If you're not pushing hard enough into the fabric, you're not gonna get like an even, totally filled in pile. So yeah, it just kind of requires some like strength muscles, maybe rather than like dexterity muscles, if that makes sense. And I am not even gonna bother testing out the versatility, testing out like mossy kind of looks, because that's already what I did back when I made the rug. The piece of fabric that was on here before was all of those samples that I made trying to get something that looks like moss. And ultimately it's like, meh, it kind of worked. Moss can be a very flat texture, so to me it was like, yeah, it should work with tufting. It should work with that kind of flat texture of tufting, but it doesn't quite translate as well. I think the best samples were the ones where I used a yarn that had a lot of texture to it, so you at least got like a little bit of floofiness there. But all in all, I'd say it's not super versatile unless you get up to those really expensive tools because you're stuck kind of with this one pile height and type. That was tufting. What's next? The supplies needed are a punch needle, yarn, scissors, cloth, there are options, we'll talk about it, a frame or hoop of some kind, and optionally backing glue. I sat down to test out punch needle so that I could come to this with like some slight ability to do the thing, and I was thinking this is gonna be the rest of my night struggling through this because, you know, I struggled with it before. Y'all, I got it right away. First try, it's not that hard. It immediately worked. Which just goes to show, given the opportunity to try a craft again that you once struggled with or you feel like you failed at, but under new circumstances, you should do that. You should take that opportunity. It might be a whole new experience this time. Anyway, let's talk price. You've got a few more supplies than latch hooking here. First of all, you need a specific punch needle. They actually did seem a little bit more expensive to me than a latch hook, but that might just be the one that I got. Again, this is something that comes in a lot of various sizes. You do actually need the different sizes, or you need an adjustable one if you want that versatility. So it's not just the width of the yarn. Like, I can fit a variety in here. The yarn that came in it is like twice the weight of this. So I can fit a variety of yarn weights in this one tool. But the length right here on the end is the length of your pile. So a lot of punch needle artwork is using the flat side, especially when you hear it referred to as like embroidery. I'm interested in the pile side. So that is a fun bit of versatility right there, that you can use either side of the piece. Words. But the length of your pile has to do with this length here. So when you see adjustable ones, I believe that's what they're adjusting, is the height of this. You can also get these small enough to use like embroidery floss with them and do something really fine and delicate, which isn't really my purpose here, but again, more versatility, although it does require multiple tools. Still, having several of these is way cheaper and easier to store than, say, having several tufting guns. I played around with 3 different styles of hoop and frame and 3 different materials. So first of all, I used monk's cloth, which is the thing that I most commonly saw suggested for punch needle. It's got a nice open weave and it really shifts around easily. So even if you're using quite a variety of yarn weights, it should pretty easily go through monk's cloth, which it did. And with this one, I used an embroidery hoop. Now this is the grippy kind, instead of like a wooden bamboo kind of embroidery hoop that really doesn't give you that much tension. These have that curve on the inside of the frame that really grabs at fabric. Both of these worked great. I then tried this frame. It worked fine. It's a bit unwieldy to hold onto. I think I'd rather hold an embroidery hoop. With that, I tried burlap or hessian, depending on where you live. Again, this worked great. It's got that really loose weave. You've got big visible holes that very easily fit the tool through. I think this is a little less tight than the monk's cloth, so you have to be a little bit more careful about the yarn not coming back out, but like totally worked. And burlap is typically pretty cheap. On this third one, I tried a Q-snap frame, which also works perfectly fine, I think. The material, I don't actually know what it is because I got it at a creative reuse store and it wasn't labeled. It kind of looks similar to a monk's cloth. It's got an open enough weave that you can see the holes, you can see through it, but it's definitely a lot like sturdier. It's more plasticky, quite frankly. And those fibers don't want to shift around nearly as easily as they do on the other two. So while I could get this tool through, I think a smaller one would be better on this. And the issue I was having is not really pushing it through, but that when I went to pull it out, because those fibers were so tight around the metal piece here, my hand would kind of like whink as I came back out. So instead of passing over the cloth very close and getting that nice flat look on the side that is supposed to be flat, I ended up with loops on the side that was supposed to be flat because I was having trouble with the tension. So like, there's a variety of fabrics you can use. Honestly, look at the fabric, see if you can like see the holes and compare those holes to the size of the tool that you're using. If you're using a really small punch needle that's meant for like the embroidery floss weight, then you can use weaver's cloth is often suggested. You could probably do it on Aida. Anything that has sort of a visible hole that this tool can go through without ripping any threads. You don't want to be ripping any of your fibers. Variety of supplies available to you. I know I'm going into more detail on punch needle, it's just because it's new to me. Obviously, again, variety of yarns that you could use depending on what size of tool you have. So like, I'd say this is still a pretty inexpensive, a pretty easy to store craft. You do kind of need a frame that is big enough for whatever you're making. If you want to make an entire rug with punch needle, you're gonna have to get yourself or build yourself a frame that can hold the size of that rug. Backing glue, I said, is optional because apparently when people are doing art pieces and they're using that flat side, they don't like do anything to the back, which in all fairness, I'm like handling this right now and nothing's happening. It's pretty secure. I would definitely put backing glue on anything I was gonna use as like a rug or something. So that's why I said it's optional. With all of that said, let's do the 6x6 test. The prep on this one isn't super hard. You're just sticking some fabric in a frame, drawing on your design. That's a very smudgy 6x6 inches, but it works. And then you thread the needle by tying the new yarn to the leftover piece and gently pulling it through. 4.5 minutes, woot woot. And you know what? I'm very confused as to why I struggled with this the first time. The only thing I can chalk it up to is maybe that the canvas was vertical rather than flat in my lap or on a table, so I was kind of reaching up for it and maybe pulling the yarn downward and out as I moved to the new section. I don't know. I would call this a pretty simple technique. It doesn't require the dexterous finger movements of latch hooking or the shoulder strength of rug tufting. Though of course your hands would get tired if you tried to do this for hours on end, as with pretty much anything. It only took me 5-ish minutes to get the whole border on there though. And then about 40 minutes to get it all filled in, so 45-ish total. That's a pretty significant time cut from latch hooking. I should note though that I did this incredibly densely. This is insanely dense. I was just going through every single, existing hole in the monk's cloth. That's a lot apparently. So this is way denser than either the latch hooking or the rug tufting was. I also love coming at it from the I want mossy textures direction, how I've got sort of like dips and raises in this. Of course, there's some loops that I would need to trim off because I accidentally punched them too far, but like, it's got up and downiness more than rug tufting. Rug tufting tends to be really even, and that was my problem, is it ends up looking like mown grass rather than moss. This is looking really mossy. I'm quite pleased with this, and I kind of want to try making a whole rug with it now. Bunch needle, who knew? Okay, but let's talk versatility a little bit more, because we already talked about using different tools to get those different pile lengths. But as far as loop and cut, this is the first one that is a loop pile entirely. So that kind of seems at first like, oh, you're stuck with a loop pile, but not really, because you could trim these loops down. This thick, you wouldn't exactly want to come in here and like snip every single loop, but you could with scissors and just cut off the top and get a cut pile. Or if you have, the trimmers that people use, you could run that over the top. And if you know that you want a cut pile, you can use a longer tool so that you get that higher pile and you have space to cut it off, So I think you very much could punch needle an entire rug and then shave it down and basically have the look of rug tufting without having to buy any of the guns. Is it gonna take longer? Yes, absolutely. But not as long as latch hooking. Y'all, punch needle is amazing for mossy textures. I mean, this is a really nice variety of texture just from the one punch needle I'm using. I'm not having any adjustable lengths or anything, but just using the different yarns gets you a lot of like lumpy bumpiness. The thinner yarn that I used ended up with slightly longer loops than anything else, so it's a little bit more raised than the rest. Especially doing not straight lines helps here. Like, I did do some short ones, but I tried to like snake back and forth and kind of like bloop 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 around a lot, so it wasn't just like back and forth and back and forth, because you can kind of see the loop direction on some of the yarn. This is definitely the winner for me so far as if you want to make something that looks like moss. I think that is enough punch needling for now though, although I'm really liking this now, yay! The next two things that I want to compare, embroidery and rug hooking. I'm calling them side contenders. They're not like in the main running. I'm still going to compare them the same way, but the reason that I'm calling them like side contenders is because with embroidery, yes, you can get a pile sort of stitch, which is what we're going to do in a minute, but I would not recommend trying to make a rug via embroidery. I don't think that would work out well, but I do think that we can make some mossy textures. And then with rug hooking, it's just a little bit different because rug hooking is typically done with fabric, not yarn. Am I gonna try to do it with yarn? Yes, I am. But the two just felt like a little bit different than punch needle, rug tufting, and latch hooking, which are all kind of trying to produce the same-ish thing. That being said, let's get into the side contenders. The supplies needed are a needle, thread, cord, or floss of some kind, scissors, fabric, and a hoop or frame. So you may have noticed that I put yarn and monk's cloth and a really chunky needle out for this, and that's because embroidery can be done with a vast variety of materials. I think people really get hung up on embroidery or needlework being done with floss or thread and being really tiny. But technically, overall, embroidery is about the stitches, not necessarily what you make the stitches with, unless you get into like some specific types of embroidery like crewel work, blah, blah, blah. But technically, you could embroider with rope on a chain link fence. And you can most definitely embroider with yarn. If you're ever trying to get like a really chunky texture, highly, highly recommend embroider with yarn. You want to make sure that you're using a fabric that is loose weave enough that that yarn can pass through easily, that the needle you're using can pass through easily, because of course you need a needle with a pretty big eye on it in order to get the yarn through the eye of the needle. Those are typically going to be like these big tapestry or even I think crochet needles. They're not really sharp on the end. That's like not going to puncture my skin. So again, you're gonna need a fabric that is loose weave and that you can like see the holes in, because this is not gonna stab through, it's just gonna fit into an already existing hole. Now, embroidery is of course extremely versatile in texture and everything with all of the different stitches. There are so many different stitches, but we're going for a pile here, and there's kind of just one stitch that mimics or gets close to tufting looks. It's often called turkey work or turkey rug because it's kind of rug-like. This is not a tutorial, so if you want to look up how to do turkey work, I even have tutorials for it way back on my channel, but that is the stitch that I'm going to be using to make this 6x6 sample. Just row after row after row of turkey work. Yay! I expect this to take the longest, but there ain't no time like the present, so let's do it. The prep for an embroidery piece is of course pretty quick and easy. Usually the longest part is transferring your design, so yay square. Less than 2 minutes, start to finish. Turkey work is the only embroidery stitch I've ever run across that starts on the front of the fabric rather than the back. You're essentially making loops of thread on top of the fabric and then locking each loop in with a stitch across its base. And because I'm using monk's cloth, my stitches are going to be extremely evenly spaced out. I'm using the pre-existing holes. I don't really have to think about where my needle is going too much. My guess is that this will lead to a not very dense final product, but we shall see. You definitely can get turkey work dense though, typically by doing small and more packed together stitches, and I often see it used as the fluffy body of a bee or a moth. That first row, not too bad, took me almost 8 minutes to stitch. Hoo! 5 hours. 4 hours and 56 minutes, to be more precise. I'm not that surprised by that. I am always surprised by how many people I hear saying like, oh no, I didn't expect embroidery to take me so long. Embroidery is very, very slow, y'all. However, dense. My expectation that it wouldn't end up that densely packed together, totally wrong. I actually was doing every single line where I started, and you can see on the back that I'm stitching in every single row of holes. And then after 5 rows, I had to start skipping rows, kind of like every 2, because it was too hard to find the holes. Like all the threads were being packed together. So that gave me a super dense texture here. This is nice. Like you cannot really see through to the back at all. You have to try really hard. And again, when it comes to the versatility kind of thing, you can make the loops however long you want. You're the one stitching it. There's no tool that is dependent on. You obviously are stitching a looped pile here, but as with punch needle, you could make that into a cut pile. You could sit here and cut every single piece, which is what I do typically when I'm doing turkey work, but I'm typically doing like a small amount. You just go and you cut every single loop. But also you could take a shaver over the top of this and it would shave the loop open, you know? That's the trade-off here. Your supplies are not too expensive, and you have extreme versatility because you're using kind of the simplest supplies, but the trade-off is the time. 5 hours. Which again, was just like normal to me. I was like, yeah, 5 hour stitching, totally normal. But like, I did the tufting one in 5 minutes. Like I said before, would you want to make an entire rug with this method? I wouldn't. If you got a ton of time on your hands, like, go for it, you could. But if you're ever doing a small-ish section of something that you want like this thick pile to, turkey work is a really great option for that. Speaking of which, I have already done the mossy sample of this because somebody was cutting down a tree this morning and it was so loud I couldn't really film anything. So here I used 4 different colors of yarn. It's a bit of a thinner yarn, and I also did both turkey work, cut, and looped, 2 different lengths there to see some difference. And then I put some French knots around it because French knots look really good for moss mimicking. You can do them big and chunky like I did here, but even if you want like a really delicate moss, French knots really tiny really create that moss look. Again, it's really just a time thing. So honestly, looking at this versus, where did it go? I'm getting overloaded with samples here. Versus the punch needle sample, I don't necessarily like this more than this. And this was so much faster. So I would say if you just want a little section of moss on, especially on like a pre-existing piece of cloth where you can't choose to use a cloth that is workable with a punch needle, sure, go for embroidery. But like, if you're trying to get a lot of moss done, I'd go for punch needle. All right, we got one more test left. And like I did with punch needle, I'm gonna go play around for a little bit before I come to you with information. The supplies needed are a rug hook, scrap fabric or yarn, scissors, backing fabric, a frame or hoop, optionally, and backing glue, also optionally. I had never heard of this until I think I was like researching rag rugs. But it is a whole thing. It's a whole thing that's not being done by a lot of people. Let's hold on to it, let's spread it, let's try it. In all of this research, I learned mainly from the company The Ragged Life. They sell some tools, and they also have a YouTube channel with really great tutorials. So I learned a lot from them. Namely that there's some really big differences between the traditional way that this is done in the UK versus the traditional way it's done in the US. I do not feel bound by my location, so I was trying out all the different stuff. One of the things they said is that in the UK, it's more traditionally done just in the hand, a piece of fabric you're just holding in your hand, no frame. I did prefer in the hand to this style of frame. Because it's like a two-handed process, it would work best with some sort of frame that's on a stand, so you're not having to hold on to all of that, which does, 1, mean more expensive supplies, and 2, mean harder to store supplies. But all of that being said, in the UK they just do it in the hand, no frame required, and that did work. I think for me there was just a bit more of a learning curve, because I also tried it just like in a hoop. And this is what I ultimately found the easiest, because with just the fabric, I was having trouble being able to hold on to it in a good way, and this just gave me like a little something more to hold on to, you know? So as far as your hoop or your frame, it is optional. So should I like count that in the supply cost? Optionally, because that is kind of the crazy thing about rug hooking. I don't know if it's just because it's less well known and less widely done, but I found the supplies to be significantly more expensive. This is the rug hook that I got. To me, it seems extremely similar to a crochet hook, and I was honestly gonna test, can you just do rug hooking with a crochet hook? And then I realized I don't have any crochet hooks. I thought I did. The difference is that the rug hook has like a pointed top, and I believe crochet hooks have a flat one. And this is so that you can stab this through fabric. That being said, the most traditional fabric to use is burlap, which has these really giant holes in it. So you're not having to stab a hole. I think if you got the properly sized crochet hook that could fit through these holes with fair ease, you could maybe use them. Because this was pretty expensive for what it is. And it went up from there. I was finding companies that had like over $100 for a rug hook. I found it comparable to when I did research on wood carving tools. And you can find like really fancy handcrafted knives with like these beautiful wooden handles and everything. And like, this is just a fascinating little tangent to me, but you don't tend to see that as often in crafts that are traditionally or stereotypically female based. You don't tend to see as many like really well-crafted, bespoke, expensive tools. There is a leaning much more towards let's make cheap tools that you can get a lot of. Has anyone else noticed this? This is just something I've been noticing recently. So yeah, it was very fascinating to find out that rug hooks went in the direction of the more we have bespoke fancy tools. This was more expensive than a latch hook or a punch needle. And that's interesting to me. I especially find this interesting because rug hooking is traditionally it's like an upcycling craft, technically. They were using potato sacks, and it's done with scrap fabric. So again, what the Ragged Life was saying a UK-US difference is in the US, we are more commonly using specifically like strips of wool material, which doesn't fray on the edges, so, you know, great. Whereas she said in the UK, it's still more common to just use any fabric scraps that you have. I would definitely lean towards the any fabric scraps. I have a ton of stretch material, and that's what I did all of my tests with, was strips of knit, of stretch material. And it looks great, and it's not gonna fray on the edges. So I would definitely say use your fabric scraps. Anyway, all of this is to say that it's a little less clear-cut with rug hooking what the supplies are that are needed and how expensive they are and how much storage space they're going to take up. It's a little less clear-cut because depending on who you ask, they might say, yeah, you need a frame and you need like a fancy rug hook and you need this specific fabric, and then other people might be like, no, you don't need any of that. I mostly did my samples on the burlap, but I also did one on monk's cloth, which again seems to be a US thing. It worked great as well. And of course, getting back into the purposes of what we're doing here, though rug hooking is traditionally done with scraps of fabric, I wanted to test it with yarn because everything I'm doing here is yarn. And guess what? It works with yarn. I tried both a pretty chunky one and like a thinner one on all of these different samples. The thinner one was easier because of the size of rug hook I have. This is pretty small. I don't know if they are all this size or if they have different sizes. When it comes to the fabric, this kind of just works fine because it grabs onto some part of the fabric and is able to pull it through. When it comes to yarn, of course, yarn will like separate if you grab a few fibers. So with the chunkier yarn, I was having a lot more trouble getting the full yarn through without just like shredding it. And with the smaller yarn, it fit on this perfectly and was really easy to pull through. Versatility of the look, it is creating a loop pile. In theory, yeah, you could go through, like I've said on other ones, and, you know, trim that whole top off and make it a cut pile. I think with this one, I definitely would not do that until I had put backing glue on everything because of the way it's being pulled through. I think if you cut the tops and you hadn't yet, like, secured the back, which I don't think is necessary to do if you're leaving it as a loop pile, especially if it's going to be like an art piece or something, you don't necessarily need to put backing glue on it. But I think if you wanted to cut the pile, you I would put backing glue on it first. Let's do our 6x6 sample, which I am gonna do in the same yarn that I've been doing all of these samples with, which should work. I don't think I'm gonna do it in this frame because this was just so unwieldy. I'm probably gonna do it in a Q-snap. Prep time, 1.5 minutes. This is old hat now. Like I said, this process is basically just stabbing your hook through the fabric and pulling a loop of yarn through to the top. Essentially, it's the reverse action of punch needle with pretty much the same result. With punch needle, we're working from the flat side of the image, the side where the yarn is going to be flat to the surface of the backing fabric, and the loops are being created on the back. Whereas with rug hooking, the flat side is on the back and we are making the loops on the top. There's a bit more of effort required here, if that makes sense. You're having to guide the yarn onto the hook and make sure it's grabbed and pull through just the right amount without pulling out the loop before, etc., etc. This framing was definitely the right choice because I could balance it on my knees and get clear access underneath, so I was actually getting the hang of this process now. The main thing slowing me up was the yarn separating sometimes, which again, I'll note, is not normal per se, since normally you'd be doing this with strips of fabric. I got that first row done in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Not bad. And I think I'm going to enjoy this process. Y'all, I could get into rug hooking. I quite enjoyed that. And I think the final texture is really cool. First of all, it's super dense, and this is where like the versatility comes in, because you are able to choose how dense you make it, which is the same with most of these things, but you're also making all of the loop lengths just in the moment. So I think if you were really precise, which I'm sure there are rug hooking artists who are very precise, you could get all of your loops exactly the same length and have this very even texture. But mine, you know, it varies a little. It goes up and down. And when we're talking about like getting a mossy texture, I think that's really good. So like comparatively with punch needle, because I think this is the most comparative with punch needle, considering it is literally the reverse, because the punch needle is working with the length of your tool, you're getting a more even pile length. But since this one, you are more in control, I think it's more difficult to get that consistent, very even pile if that's what you're going for. And in my case, that's great because you get this nice, more natural, I would say, texture to it. Yeah, this was fun. I really enjoyed this, and I definitely want to do some more rug hooking. Time was 2 hours and 8 minutes, and it only used 25 grams of yarn, which is the least. I mean, latch hook took 28, so it's not the least by like a drastic amount, but it is the least. Let me grab some different yarns and see if I can make some even more mossy textures than this. Woohoo! Okay, I didn't do a super big sample of this because honestly, it looks an awful lot like the punch needle one. Are we surprised? No. The difference being that you can get different heights with the same tool. You can get different heights of loop within the same little bit of yarn here without having to change tools by just pulling them kind of more sporadically. And so I do have a little bit more of a lumpy texture here that maybe looks more natural, whereas this one is a little bit more even. I think we're done here. Yeah, I think it's time to take a look at that chart again. I literally printed it out for myself because it's kind of confusing. Apologies to anyone who finds this chart very confusing, but you can pause the screen and stare at it for as long as you need to. Basically, I am rating everything in comparison to the others. So this is not like a 1 to 10 kind of thing. It's dynamic grading. There's a term for this, but I'm not sure that's what it is. Basically, there is a grade 1 through 5, and they are each giving out only once in each category. And then down at the bottom, I did put the yarn usage. That's not like a ranking. I just thought that might be interesting information. 5 is always like the better thing, quote unquote, better. I don't think it's necessarily better for something to be faster, but that is generally, good words there, generally the, stereotypical opinion. Faster is better. So 5 is always the quote-unquote better thing, and 1 is the quote unquote, worse thing. So the time ranking is literally just by how long each one took. Tufting, of course, took the shortest amount of time. Embroidery, of course, took the longest amount of time. Overall, just looking at this, you'll probably quickly notice that tufting and embroidery tend to take a lot of the 1s and the 5s, and then latch hook, rug hooking, and punch needle are all kind of floating around in the middle. When it came to all these other categories, which are largely based on my opinion of the experience, I really had to just stop debating at a certain point, because there were times that I was like, really? Like, latch hook versus rug hooking, which one is really more or less? But like, I just had to make some decisions in the end. If you disagree with any of my numbers, you can tell me about it in the comments. Versatility is the next easy score. This is like versatility of style. So like cut versus loop pile, or can you get both? The height of your pile, how many different heights can you get without having to get a different tool? How much is like cost affecting the versatility, etc. So for me, tufting is the least versatile because it is so tied up in expense. Like, yes, you can get a loop and a cut pile, you can get all the different lengths, but you are having to buy very expensive supplies to achieve those things. Whereas I thought embroidery, and this is where you may disagree, is the most versatile because yes, we did only look at one stitch mainly, but you can also do a bunch of other stitches. And among turkey work itself, you can do it as a loop, or you can do it as cut. You can do it whatever height you want. You can do it as densely packed as you want. All of that is just your own choice that you're making in the moment with a needle and thread. And then latch hook, punch needle, and rug hooking. Latch hook, I think, is the least versatile of those three because you can't really make a solid loop pile with it. Rug hooking, I thought, was the most versatile of those three because you could make a loop or you could cut it. You can do it with fabric as well as with yarn. You can literally vary up the height of the loops like one to the next. You don't even have to switch tools or anything. Supplies, I broke down into the cost of supplies, the size or the storage space that they would take up, and then this is versatility again, but this is versatility of the tools. Can you use the tools for anything else? So like again, tufting is 1s across the board. The tools are pretty much only used for tufting. You can't use a tufting gun to do something else. Whereas embroidery gets 5s across the board, because a sewing needle, a needle in general, can be used for a lot of things. You can use a variety of fabrics. The debate among the supplies when it came to cost and size especially came down to like the frames. Which ones require frames, which ones optionally need frames. And I did debate here quite a bit because embroidery doesn't require a frame, but for this style of embroidery it kind of does, whereas latch hook doesn't require a frame, but then latch hook material is very specific and not something that you would generally have on hand. You do have to go source that specific kind of fabric, whereas embroidery you can do in any kind of fabric. These were all the debates I was having. It was a lot. And then the difficulty category I split up into dexterity, which I'm meaning like how many motions your fingers have to make, muscle, which is like how tiring is this activity on your muscles over time, and then focus. How much am I having to actually pay full attention to what I'm doing versus like doing a rote motion that I can barely pay attention to at all. And this is the one that most like jangled up the order. Tufting for once got an overall 4 because they got a 5 in one and a 1 in the other, and so I was like, well, it can't, yeah. It's a whole thing. I found the easiest overall thing I tried to be punch needle, which still cracks me up because I thought it was gonna be hard and I struggled with it that first random time. No, punch needle was so easy. I think it is a great option if you have like someone who shouldn't be using a sharp needle, whether because of their age or because they're shaky or something, but they want to do a type of embroidery. Punch needle is not sharp, it's not going to penetrate your skin, but you can get this fun embroidery thing. There's so little required of you, and that made it really, really fun. I like a craft like embroidery. I put as the number 1 here, requiring the most focus or dexterity, like the hardest. Not that it's actually hard, but of these 5, the most difficult. And again, that's because there's such a variety of stitches, and there's a lot of choices that you can be making about what you're doing with your stitches to get the look that you want. Whereas for punch needle, and even for tufting, which I put as number 4, you're not making a lot of choices. You're kind of just doing the same repetitive motion over and over again. Rug hooking and latch hook were the 2 that I was like, which one, which one? In the end, I found rug hooking to be a little tricky at first to get, but once I got it, it was a really smooth, continuous motion, whereas latch hooking, I could get the concept on the first one. It's like, here's what you do, okay, do it, but it wasn't a very, like, smooth or comfortable process. Really ever. I think you'd have to really get into it before latch hooking would be a smooth thing, because there's so much movement of the yarn and picking up of new ones, and like rug hooking, you're using one long continuous piece and it's just chunk, 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 chunk. So that was kind of the debate there, but I decided that rug hooking is easier, quote unquotes, because like once you get it, you got it. And latch hook is just kind of always a little bit fiddly. So overall, what these numbers translate to, the advice I would give after doing this is, if you want to get into making rugs, like production of full-sized rugs, go for tufting. If you want to make a rug, even if it's a full-sized one, a pretty big one, but you just want to make a single rug, my suggestion would be punch needle. If you want a small patch of moss-looking something on something, embroidery. But know going into it that it is slow and it will take you a long time. With rug hooking and latch hook, I don't know that there's any like they're not the standout things to me of like, you should do it for this specific thing. They're both just crafts, techniques, methods that I'm like, yo, you should try that. Try it. You can get kits really easily for latch hook, which I think makes it the more approachable thing, whereas rug hooking, again, like, I don't see it around much, but burlap is pretty easy to find. You can do it with your scrap fabric. I'd be fascinated if anyone has a crochet hook. Try it with a crochet hook and see if that works. I wish I could have tried it. I'm not gonna go get a crochet hook for this though. So that is my overall takeaway on these 5 methods. I'm so glad I finally did this. I have been putting this off since January because I thought it was gonna be like a whole thing, and it kind of was a whole thing. This was several days process, but I had so much fun getting to try punch needle and rug hooking. I'm so glad I finally tried those. I think punch needle is what I'm going to end up doing mostly for the mossy stuff that I want to put on my rug, which, by the way, I'm not actually doing in this video. This was just about deciding what method I wanted to do. I probably won't do a video of that, but we'll see. If not, I will post pictures. That's about all for me. If you enjoy crafty explorations, if you love a good compare and contrast, if you like to watch other people learn things so that you can learn from them learning, this is the place to do it. Feel free to subscribe. Nowadays, with the way things are going on YouTube, you kind of do have to subscribe to a channel and go to your subscription feed if you want to see videos from them again. So I highly recommend actually doing that if you would like to see more videos from me. You can also check out the backlog because I've got quite a long one and there's a bunch of explorations on there, and we've had a lot of fun. I've had so much fun over the last 5 years exploring craft, so thanks for joining me, and I will see you again very soon. I said that like something special is gonna happen. I'll just see you next week, like normal.